Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be going over material presets in TextMesh Pro and explaining what they are, how you create them, and how you use them. So let's take a look. So in a previous video, I covered how to create your font assets in TextMesh Pro using the font asset creator. And I also explained how when you're using Sign Distance Field, you only need a single font asset for any given font to render that font cleanly at any point size or any resolution. So the question is, since in a scene you're likely to have different text objects and you're likely to want different visual treatments on those text objects, and by visual treatment I mean in this case we're looking at Arial SDF, but this Arial SDF is not plain white, right? It's got an outline and it's got a shadow. Well, what if I wanted 15 different permutations of that treatment, right? One with different colors, different outline thickness, different softness. Maybe one's got beveling, another one's got texture on the face of the text, another one's got a texture on the outline. How do you manage all these different visual treatments? And this is basically where material presets come into play. So let's take a look at that. To showcase the material presets, I'm going to create a new font asset. That way, since it's new, it won't have any pre-existing material presets, so you'll get a chance to see the process of the creation of the material presets to basically the use of it from start to finish. So to create our font asset, I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to open my TextMesh Pro Font Asset Creator. I will select the font file that I will be working with. In this case, it's Futura Standard Bold. And I won't change any of the settings, and I will generate my font atlas. Once it's generated, I'll make sure that my sampling point size, which in this case turned out to be 63, is good in relationship to our padding value. As I discussed in a previous video about font asset creation, the relationship of the padding to the sampling point size determines the range of our material properties. And by range, I mean how far will the shadow offset go? How far will the glow offset go? So it's determined by the relationship of these two. And as I mentioned in a previous video, as long as you have a range between 8 and 10%, it gives you a good versatile font to work with. So in this case, everything looks good. So I'm going to save this font asset. And our next step is I'm going to create a new text object and assign this new font asset to it. And then we'll begin the process of creating our material presets. First, let's create a new scene. And then we're going to add our text object by going to Create, UI, and then we're going to select the TextMesh Pro text right here. So we're going to then expand our canvas and select our text object. Let's change our text. And let's assign our newly created font asset by going to Font Asset and selecting our Futura Standard Bold SDF. I'm going to adjust the rect transform so everything's on one line and recenter everything. So as you assign a new font asset, TextMesh Pro will automatically use the default material that's embedded in that font asset. So what do I mean by default material? So if I select the font asset and I navigate to it to bring up the font asset editor panel, you're going to see that the editor panel shows that the font asset has information about the font and the font metrics. So in this case, it tells us what the font source was, which was the Futura standard TTF file. It tells us what our sampling point size ended up being, which was 63. Then it's got information about the font metrics, which is the line height, baseline, ascender, and all these different things. But it also contains our padding value and our width and our height of our atlas resolution, font atlas resolution. It contains a list of all the glyphs or characters included in the font asset. And in this case, we never imported our kerning table, but if we had, we would see all of our kerning pairs. And I could actually manually add kerning pairs if I wanted to. Now this font asset also includes sub-assets that are embedded in it. And those sub-assets are the font atlas texture. So if I double click on it to expand it, this is all of our characters that we generated that are included in our font asset. So that's included as a sub-asset to our font asset. It also includes a material that if I double click on it, actually let me double click correctly, it also contains a reference to this font atlas texture that we created. So when I refer to this default font material, we're talking about this one here that's embedded in the font asset itself. Okay? So every font asset is constructed the same way. Every single one of them will have a reference and include its font atlas texture, and it's going to include a default material that references that texture. So let's go back to our text object. If we scroll down to take a look at the material inspector, the material and properties that we're seeing here are those of the default material that's embedded in our font asset. As a general rule, I never modify the properties of my default materials. I always leave them as plain white text with no styling. That way, as I switch from font asset to font asset, I know I'm going to be getting a consistent visual result between all of them, since they'll all be using the plain white text with no styling. I rely on material presets to give me the visual styling that I want with outlines and shadow and so on and so forth. The next thing that I always do is, since I'm not going to be using the advanced features available in the TextMesh Pro Distance Field Shader, namely the texturing, the beveling, the glow, and all this functionality, I always switch to the more efficient TextMesh Pro Mobile Distance Field Shader. Right now you can't see that part because it's off screen, but I always switch to TextMesh Pro Mobile Distance Field. And this one is more efficient, mostly because it doesn't have all the advanced features, but since I'm not using them, I may as well use the more efficient shader. So next, let's take a look at how we create our material presets to give us the visual styling that we want. Let's say that we wanted to create a material preset for this current font asset that would have an outline around our text. Now to do that, we would access a special context menu that I added for TextMesh Pro, which is accessible by either clicking on the gear here, left click, or right clicking on the header of the material inspector. Now we can see the context menu and all of its options, and the one we're interested in right now is the duplicate material. When I click on this, a duplicate of the previously assigned material is automatically made, and this copy is instantly assigned to our current text object. So the previous material that we were using was our default material, and now we have a copy of this default material, and the copy is right here in and accessible in our project panel. Now, since our intention is to have this have an outline, I'm going to rename it to whatever the name of our material was plus outline. So that way I know that when I'm going to use this material, it will be the one that we want with the outline. So let's add our outline. I'm going to go 0.1. We're going to enable outline, and I'll set the outline to 0.2. So now we do have a material preset called Futura Bold SDF Outline. So let's go back to our normal material, and the way you can go back and forth between material presets is you can select the material preset and drag it over the material inspector, and now you can see that we switched back to our plain white text. If I want to go to the outline version or material preset, I select this material preset and drag it over the material inspector, and now we can see it's the one with an outline. Now let's create another one with a soft shadow. So to do so, same thing, bring up the context menu, duplicate the one with an outline, select it because I want that one to be my soft shadow, or I'll call it drop shadow. I'm going to go back to it and modify it to enable the underlay, expand the underlay panel, add my offset, little Y offset, and add some softness to it. And now I've created my second material preset. Again, if I want to go back and forth between all of those, this is our default material. This is, whoops, wrong one. This is the one with our outline, and this is the new one with drop shadow. Now, there's another way that I added or a workflow improvement that I made in the latest release of TextMesh Pro, which is now in the text editor panel. Right under font asset, you have this new material preset. This is a pull down that will show you a list of all the compatible material presets for the given font asset. So now the first one will always be the default font material. and the other ones are your presets that you've created. So this is a very simple way to go back and forth between all the material presets that you've created. Just for fun, let's create a third material preset, but this time we're going to create one using the normal distance field shader. So we're going to go and right click again to bring up our context menu. We're going to click duplicate material. This one I want to actually use a gradient texture on my text, so I'm going to already call it gradient. Since the gradient texture feature is accessible on the normal TextMesh Pro distance field shader, we're going to switch our shader to use the distance field version. We're going to assign our texture. Let's pick this one here. Just for fun, let's add some beveling. And I'll adjust the lighting properties. So I'll make it brighter, less reflective than it is now. And let's play with the light angle a little bit. And that should be good enough. And now we've got this new preset that we've created. Let's go back to our text object and take a look at our material preset list. This is our default material. This is the outline version that we created. We've got our drop shadow, and then we've got the one with the gradient. So as you can see, material presets are a very convenient way to give visual styling to your text objects. In the end, we're always still using the same font asset. All of these material presets are super lightweight because in the end, they're referencing the font atlas texture that's embedded in the font asset, thus avoiding any duplication of resources, namely the font atlas texture, which basically is the largest part in terms of size of your font asset. In the past, I've run into some TextMesh Pro users who were duplicating their entire font assets in order to do what material presets do, and that's really not efficient because again, you're duplicating this font atlas texture all over the place where it's not necessary. Another thing that's important to keep in mind or understand is when you regenerate your font assets, the font asset creator will actually also update all your material presets to update the reference to this font atlas texture. So as you regenerate, if you had 50 different material presets for a font asset, they would also all get updated automatically. A quick minor detail here about font assets. If you look at a font in Unity, you'll notice that you can expand the font, and when you do that, it reveals an embedded material and embedded font atlas texture. Well, TextMesh Pro font assets are constructed the same way, where you have your data structure, and then you have the embedded material and embedded font atlas texture. Now, up until the latest release of Unity 5.3, there's been a bug in Unity going back to Unity 3 point something, where when you were using a scriptable object and adding sub assets to it, you could not reveal them this way. I had to hide them because the bug would cause the children to be shown first, and it was just kind of messy. So now going forward, you're going to be able to see these sub assets in the project panel. But if you're using an older version of Unity, then these sub assets will still be hidden. So basically, this concludes the video for the material presets. As you can see, it's a very convenient way to access and do your styling on your text objects. So if I go back to my normal Arial SDF, like so, you can see, all the different presets that I have for Arial SDF. And if I was to go back to this new font asset that we created, which I'm overlooking right now, which is right here, we can see again all of the presets available for it. So if you have any questions about material presets or anything in this video, please feel free to post on the TextMesh Pro user forum or to simply reach out to me. Thank you for watching.